So after so many people asking me to check out this keyboard, I finally managed to get a review unit to show you guys thanks to Banggood.com. And I think so many people have asked for it because it's like everywhere on the internet and is relatively cheap for a mechanical keyboard. There's pretty much nothing on the box, so we can open it, and again hardly anything in here. We have the manual and a warranty card. And then the keyboard itself in a foam sleeve and is also protected by some soft cell foam. Alright, so here's the keyboard itself, and first impressions is that it's quite light, narrow and slim for a mechanical keyboard, especially for a full-size keyboard. The reason as to why it's so light is because it uses thin plastic and aluminium for the build, just like many of the keyboards in this class. The black plastic has a slight texture to it, but is smooth, so fingerprints won't show, and the aluminium is brushed, but again it's quite smooth, so fingerprints aren't as apparent as more coarser brushed aluminium finishes. And the brush finish is something that people will love or hate. Personally, I prefer something a bit cleaner, like a smooth anodized finish. At the top right we have our LED lock indicators, which are quite large, and then the Motospeed logo. This is a generic board and I've seen a number of other brands on the same keyboard, but overall the case is quite simplistic in the aesthetic, which I do appreciate. Here's a look at the side profile. It's quite slim for a mechanical keyboard and quite flat as well, with its natural incline being fairly flat, but also since there's no plastic top shell, it looks even slimmer, even though it really isn't. And without a top shell, it has a floating key design, so the key switches are exposed from the side, which again you may like, so it's just like on the Corsair keyboards. The layout is a full-sized 104 key layout, which is an ANSI layout as well, which is reflected in the model name. And I know many mechanical keyboards aren't full-sized in this budget range, so this is actually quite a unique product. So if you really do need that numpad with you all the time, then we do have the numpad to use. Looking at the keycaps, the typeface of font is a gamery font. It is a gaming keyboard though, so it does make sense. But as always, I don't like it and most others don't like it, and I personally don't think it's necessary and it's not really needed to be associated with such a font. But yeah, these seem to just be the stock keycaps for many of these cheap boards. The keyboard doesn't come with anything, so there's no keycap puller, which is unfortunate. So if you want to check out the mechanical key switches below, then buy a keycap puller, which will cost you hardly anything. And taking up the keycaps, these are double shot ABS keycaps. So double shot just means that the character is another piece of plastic, being that clear plastic, which is the legend. This means it's more durable and the character will never fade away. So it's better than like Corsair or Razer type of keycaps, which are coated in black and then laser etched. However, these are very thin like many stock keycaps, which does detract from the typing experience just a bit. And underneath these keycaps are the key switches. These use Ultimate Blue switches, which is an extremely common Chinese clone of the German-made Cherry MX key switches. So basically they mimic the Cherry MX Blues but are a touch stiffer and a bit louder. And since they are clones, yes, you can chuck on whatever aftermarket keycaps you want. Blues are of a medium weight and are clicky, so when you reach halfway you will feel the tactile bump and then hear the loud click. And here's a quick sound test. And now to the lighting. This is an RGB keyboard, which is a nice feature to have. It's not RGB to the extent of the 16.8 color spectrum of other devices, rather it has the main colors and a few in between. First I'll press function and escape to reset the keyboard, and as always the lighting is controlled via the function key with the up and down arrow keys controlling the brightness. There's a couple of preloaded profiles on the keyboard for different games, from 1 to 5. These may be useful, but we can fully customize any of these profiles by pressing function and home when on a specific lighting profile, and then the color can be changed for any individual key. And then of course we have our lighting effect modes. So pretty standard effects, and they're nice to have I guess, but for most of us we just want it stationary, and having the RGB aspect just allows us to match it to our setup or whatever. And that's just one thing I want to touch on about people saying that RGB is a gimmick and is too flashy. Like I said, it's just an option and it allows for flexibility in matching our keyboard to how you like or to your setup. It doesn't need to be flashing 20 different colors at the same time. What is wrong though is overpricing something just because it has RGB as a feature, which does exist in some products. Now to the insides. This thing takes quite a while to open with the billions of screws it has. 4 of the screws are Torx screws for some reason, and the rest are Phillips head screws. The plastic bottom shell is quite thin, but it does have some ribbing on the bottom surface for reinforcement, and also reinforced screw bosses. The PCB is mounted onto the aluminium backplate, which is about 1.5mm thick, so a pretty standard thickness for steel backplates, but of course much lighter. So it doesn't have that traditional mechanical keyboard heft to it. The PCB looks pretty clean, and they're using SMD LED lighting, so they're mounted on the PCB, but they're mounted on the other side. So overall, it's a unique product in that it's a cheap keyboard which is available everywhere on the internet and even under different brands, but it's also RGB, but then it's also full sized, and that's really cool to see since so many in this range are 10 keyless. The keyboard is very light, but that doesn't mean it's not built well. It does feature an aluminium plate, and together with the PCB there's hardly any flex, so there's no problems there. And then the plastic bottom shell on the bottom is again light and thin, but when attached to the rest of it there's no problems. So it's not the best, but at the same time it's better than most membrane keyboards, but in doing this it's quite light and doesn't give that traditional mechanical keyboard heft. I think the aesthetics are not borderline but on the way to the other side with a gamery aesthetic. The shape is absolutely fine, but it's the brushed aluminium, gamery font on the keycaps and the excessive top right corner that just make it a touch more messy, but still it's a taste thing and it's still quite clean overall. And with all that said, if you have a tight budget then this may be the one for you. Otherwise, if you can, just save up a bit more and treat yourself to something a bit more better built.